Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm glad you could join us here on this Friday. Beautiful, if chilly Friday. I don't know where it's like where you are, but that's what it is here. My name is Dave Hazan. I'm a PhD candidate at York University in Toronto. And I am the coordinator, one of the two coordinators for the CHA virtual workshop and roundtable series. We are very, very happy to have our first workshop today with Dr. Donald Wright from the University of New Brunswick. So Don Wright completed his, is a professor of political science at the University of New Brunswick. He completed his degrees at Mount Allison University, McGill, and the University of Ottawa. In 1998, he was a Fulbright Scholar in the Department of History at NYU. Prior to joining UNB, he held a joint appointment in the Department of History and Center for Canadian Studies at Brock University. And in 2011-2012, he was a visiting fellow at Clare Hall, the University of Cambridge. I didn't know that. That's great. Dr. Wright's book, The Professionalization of History in English Canada, was shortlisted by the Canadian Historical Association for the Sir John A. Macdonald Prize for Best Book in Canadian History. That I knew. I had to read it for my comps. Dr. Crichton, A Life in History, was published by the University of Toronto Press in 2015, was a finalist for the 2017 Canada Prize awarded by the Federation of Humanities and Social Sciences. In 2008, Dr. Wright co-edited Symbols of Canada, a collection of short essays on popular Canadian symbols and what they reveal about changing definitions of Canada. And in July 2020, he published Canada, a very short introduction as part of Oxford University Press's very short introduction series. That's great. He's currently writing a Shirk-supported book about historian Ramsay Cook. And perhaps most important for our own services here, Don was the review editor at the Canadian Historical Review from 2016 to 2022. For all of us who had book reviews edited by Dr. Wright, we all know how conscientious and great he was there. So the way this is going to work, well, for starters, we're just going to take a quick moment here to thank Dr. Wright for coming. So, thank you. The way this is going to work is it is a workshop. So we're going to begin. Don will speak for 15 to 20 minutes. And then following that, we're hoping to have a good conversation about how what makes a good book review. And I think, if I'm right, that once the conversation begins, we're going to turn off the recording. But until then, this is being recorded. So without further ado, let's hand it over to Dr. Donald Wright. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And I'd like to begin with a territorial acknowledgement that I'm speaking from Fredericton, the traditional homelands of the Wistake people. And these territories are governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties of the 18th century. Thank you, David, for that introduction. It was very generous and much appreciated. In the same way, and some of you I know were here last week, in the same way that last week's session considered the survey course from a variety of perspectives, at one point asking, what is a survey course anyway? I want this session to consider the book review from a variety of perspectives. Why do we write book reviews? Why do we read book reviews? What are we looking for in a book review? In short, what makes a good book review? And as David said, I'll be looking to you to help me answer these questions, making this less a lecture and more of a conversation. But first, me. I've been reviewing books for, yikes, this dates me 20 plus years. Indeed, my very first publication was a book review. Oh my God, I was so proud when this is long before email, long before PDFs, when I received that hard copy in the mail, seeing my name in print. For a few seconds, I thought I was Michael Ondaatje. And over the years, I've reviewed books in academic journals, specialized book review publication, the Literary Review of Canada, and in the Globe and Mail. And recently, I started reviewing climate books for an online climate publication. As well, as David mentioned, for 6 years, I was the book review editor for the Canadian Historical Review, taking over from Stephen Maynard, who I think I saw here. And he did it for several years as well. In any event, I was book review editor for 6 years at the CHR, where I commissioned, edited, and published nearly 500 book, film, museum, and art gallery reviews, or about 20 per issue. I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I've learned a few things along the way. First, book reviews advance the scholarly conversation. Like the monograph, the academic article, and the conference paper, they advance knowledge. And if that sounds idealistic, I suppose it's because it is idealistic. Speaking from personal experience, I learned a ton from the reviews of my books, especially my biography of Donald Creighton. And a handful of those reviews were quite critical and even bruising, but they will help me going forward in my next project, a book about historian Ramsay Cook. I actually wrote to one of the reviewers who had some pretty tough things to say, thanking them for taking the time to engage with my book. Again, a good book review can advance knowledge. Book reviews not only advance knowledge, they can be read as a source of knowledge. That is, they can be read as a primary source by intellectual historians, book historians, literary biographers, and for that matter, anyone interested in historiography. As a PhD student at the University of Ottawa, writing a dissertation on the professionalization of history, I amassed an archive of book reviews, especially of reviews written in the 1920s and 1930s. And I read them not for what they could tell me about Harold Innis's books or about the Canada-America Relations series, but for what they could tell me about the early profession and its emerging norms. Later, when writing my biography of Donald Creighton, I created an archive of review of his many books. In this instance, I read them for what they could tell me about how Creighton's ideas were welcomed, and crucially, what they could tell me about how his ideas were challenged. Like any primary source, book reviews can be read in any number of ways, historiographically, biographically, and sometimes against the grain for what they don't say about a book and its author. But what makes a good book review? First and foremost, a good book review tells the reader what the book is about and why they should, and I suppose in some cases, why they shouldn't read it. As a review editor, I was amazed by the number of reviewers who didn't do this basic task, and by the number of times I had to return it with something like the following plea. Please summarize the book's basic argument and its contents in a couple of hundred words. Indeed, one of the reasons that we read book reviews is because we can't read every single book that is published, but we can keep abreast our fields through review sections of our professional journals. I remember one of my professors at Mount Allison saying that the first thing that they did when they received their copy of the American Historical Review and of the Canadian Historical Review was to read the review section from beginning to end. It was a way to keep up and keep on top of their research and teaching fields. Of course, a book review ought to be more than a simple summary. After all, we don't call it a book précis. So what else should a good book review do? I put this question to a handful of historians in a totally unscientific survey. One colleague wanted to know where the book fit in the historiography. Fair enough. Every book either builds on and or challenges existing scholarship. Another colleague, a total archive rat, I should add, looked for a discussion of sources. What archives did the writer visit? What data did they crunch? How did they use or not use routinely generated sources like baptismal records in parish archives? A third colleague was more interested in theory. How did the writer interpret their sources? Through what theories of race, class, gender, empire, nation, and region did they read their sources? A fourth colleague said that they liked book reviews that, quote, piqued their interest, that made them want to read the book. They liked reviews that aspired to be something more than a simple summary or a discussion of sources and a discussion of theories of nation and region. A fifth colleague reported that while book reviews are a pretty thankless task, they are an important task. They are especially important, they said, when they engage with scholarship in ways of writing history that have not been adequately recognized by the profession. Done well and thoughtfully, They can value and legitimize new ways of knowing the past. Of course, all of this, historiography, sources, theory, piquing one's interest, recognizing and legitimating new ways of knowing, is easier said than done. I mean, scholarly reviews typically run 750 to 850 words. Occasionally, a journal will permit 1,000 words, but the norm seems to be 750 to 850 words. Although I just agreed to review a book for a journal that set a limit of 600 words. I guess what I'm saying is this: a review can't do everything, meaning the reviewer has to make choices. The reviewer has to ask themselves this question. In addition to a summary of the book's argument and content, do I focus on sources, methodology, theory, trying to pique the reader's interest, identifying epistemological innovations, or combination of the above? And look, there's no right or wrong answer, but choices have to be made in order to give the review coherence. In my totally unscientific survey, I also asked my colleagues, is there something a book review shouldn't do? One person said they didn't like what they called a trash fest. Surely, they added, even the worst book has at least one redeeming feature. And I couldn't agree more. As a review editor, I welcomed frank and tough criticism, but several times I had to send a review back, inviting the author to lower the temperature. My standard line was something like, look, we take our lumps in this game, but your relentless criticism opens you up to criticism. And remember, at least one person is going to read your review, and that's the author of the book. Oh, sure, authors will claim that they never read reviews, that they have thick skins, that they can take a hit. Trust me, they can't. As review editor at the CHR, I often heard from authors who felt that their book had been unfairly reviewed. Occasionally, they had a point. I mean, as review editor, I didn't always see the book, meaning I had to rely on the reviewer's assessment. But occasionally, they didn't. Indeed, on a couple of occasions, I was flamed. Oh my God, they were mad at me. I should never have published the review. What was I thinking? You, of all people, Dawn, a historian of the profession, asking that person to review my book, and so on, and so on, and so on. I guess what I'm saying is this: there's a difference between being tough and being unkind. And that difference can sometimes be hard to find, but not necessarily. And certainly you can work with your review editor to help you find that elusive middle ground between being tough and being unkind. If you can't review a book because it's simply dreadful, in your opinion, don't review it. Send it back to the review editor. This happened a couple of times in my tenure at the CHR, when, after receiving the book, reviewers quietly returned it, saying that they simply couldn't review it. As review editor, I appreciated their honesty and frankness. In one case, I agreed and the book was not reviewed. In another, I disagreed and the book was reviewed, very positively, in fact. Another person in my unscientific survey said that a book review shouldn't be about the book the author didn't write. In other words, they said, don't tell us what the book doesn't do or what you would have done. Tell us what the book does. Again, I totally agree. Indeed, I remember as a graduate student, when the American Historical Association met in Toronto, bumping into a senior historian at the conference, and they were in a bit of a funk. I asked them what was wrong, and they said, oh, I just read a review of my book that cheesed me off. They reviewed the book I didn't write. There may have been an expletive or two, but that historian had a point about book reviews. A good book review reviews the book that was written, not the book that wasn't written, or the book that they would have written. Returning to my survey, a third colleague said that they hated cliches in book reviews. For example, this book is a welcome addition, or every historian should read this book. They were also tired of certain words, sensitive and brilliant being two, as in the author sensitively positions their book, or the author brilliantly argues that. Surely, they said, there's another word for sensitive and brilliant. Finally, one colleague really disliked reviews that criticized a historian's writing. Look, they said, we can't all be Margaret Atwood or Donald Creighton, or for that matter, Brian Palmer. In my opinion, they were right. To describe someone else's work as academic, boring, pedestrian, workmanlike, and grad studenty, words I had to remove from more than one CHR review, is unkind and unhelpful. It's also sometimes the case of the Wi-Fi calling the narrator unreliable. Again, we all can't be Brian Palmer or Adele Perry, both lovely writers. I now want to share what I call a couple of tricks of the trade, or a couple of things that I've picked up over the years, especially as review editor. First and foremost, remember your reader. If you're writing for an academic journal, your readers will be academics. If you're writing for a newspaper or a blog, your readers will be knowledgeable, but they won't be experts. So tailor your review accordingly. What does my reader already know? What does my reader want to know? And what do I think my reader needs to know? Specialists and generalists will have different wants and different needs, and it's your job to know what those wants and needs are. Another trick of the trade, I really like reviews that use an opening hook, an observation, an anecdote, a coincidence to draw the reader in. And I really like a good tagline, a concluding sentence that leaves the reader with a final, pithy, and clever observation. Of course, a good opening hook and a clever tagline are not easy, but they are effective. And they take aim at what my colleague described as piquing my interest. Yet another trick of the trade, incorporate the title of the book into your review. After all, book titles are deliberate, and they can be unpacked. Referring to, drawing on, and explaining a book's title is a neat and tidy way of explaining the book's larger purpose. I can't tell you the number of times that I asked a reviewer to explain what the author meant by the title, especially a clever title. I guess, so I'd write back to the reviewer. I say, I can't tell you the number of times to explain what the author meant by the title, especially a clever title. I can guess, I said, but it would help me and it would help readers to know what the book is about if you explain its title. On that note, and in the same way that a book's title can be incorporated into a review, so too can a book's cover. Does it feature a famous painting, a well-known photograph, a really cool layout and design? True, you can't judge a book by its cover, but you can use a book's cover to considerable effect in a review. Indeed, I once began a review with something like, this book begins not with its table of contents, but with its cover. And that was my way of beginning my conversation about the book. Now, my final trick of the trade, edited volumes. Edited volumes are notoriously difficult to review. After all, no one can meaningfully review 10 to 13 distinct essays in 750 to 850 words. When reviewers ask me how they might proceed, I would suggest something like the following. Describe the volume as a whole, what's its goal, what are the editors trying to accomplish, and then pivot to a handful of articles or chapters. Your pivot can look something like the following. My favorite essays, not because they were necessarily the best, but because they spoke to my research interests, were chapters X, Y, and Z. Another reviewer in another journal may single out chapters A, B, and C. So all their essays will get reviewed somewhere in the many journals in Canada. Now, before turning over this workshop to you and to us having a conversation about book reviews, reviewing, and what makes a good book review, I want to offer some free advice, especially to graduate students and junior scholars. First, every journal will have a set of guidelines on how style, formatting, byline, etc. Please, I beg you, as a former review editor, follow them. It never ceased to amaze me how many scholars simply sent me 750 words, expecting me to add the bibliographic information in the byline, to fix the citations, and to put it into house style. Second, meet the deadline you agreed to. Journals have their own internal production deadlines, and authors want to see their books reviewed in a timely fashion. Third, if you can't meet your deadline, and look, life gets in the way, things happen, let your review editor know. which leads to my fourth piece of advice, again, especially to grad students and junior scholars. Don't ghost your review editor. Nothing is more frustrating.
Okay, well, I want to say thank you to everyone for showing up. It's very well appreciated. Especially, of course, thank you to Dr. Wright for imparting his wisdom upon us. I thought this was a really good conversation. I would remind everyone that the series continues on October 6th. We're going to have a roundtable on the future of the history PhD in Canada with one of my favorite professors, Dr. Catherine Carstairs. And on the 19th of October, we will be having a workshop on grant writing for social change with Andrea Prajarova. I hope I pronounced that right. And I encourage you to go to the CHA website, and you will see a list of all the upcoming workshops and roundtables. There'll be in English and in French. And I really, again, urge you to check those out. The first two have been excellent, and we hope to only go up from here. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming out. And one last time, thank you very much, Dawn.